Hey, what is going on, Los Angeles? Welcome to the Rams Skinny here on the LAFB Network. We are Los Angeles Sports. Thank you, as always, for making us a part of your day. This is post-Super Bowl. Season is officially over. We are officially in free agency and draft season. So for your Rams, a lot of fun action that we're going to talk about here coming up. But, today we're going to talk a little bit post-Super Bowl, not necessarily about the Super Bowl, but just kind of how it pertains to the Rams, being they played the Eagles the best in the playoffs, what the Super Bowl kind of signified in terms of roster construction and team building. And then obviously we got to talk about Matthew Stafford a little bit. Obviously been in the news quite a bit, and his wife, as always, in the news, stirring up some stuff. I feel like she does it just for fun now. Like I would. Good for her. But we'll get into all that. First and foremost, my man, Skinny T. How you doing, man?
Doing good. Feeling fresh. It's a whole new year. This is, there's the new year, there's the Chinese New Year. This is like the football new year. Yeah. We're on to new things. We're moving forward. 2024 is long in the rear view. It's fresh and new.
That's right. Well, I think that didn't the Chinese New Year just happen? Like last weekend or something?
Quite possibly. I don't know.
I remember my wife saying she went down to Old Town, met a friend, Old Town Pasadena, and there was a bunch of celebrations going on.
Oh wow.
And I heard it's like the year of the snake. I'm like, that doesn't sound good. I don't know anything about the Chinese New Year and the symbols, but year of the snake. I mean, anything with snake, it sounds deceptive, or I don't know. I'm not a fan of that. Maybe it's a good thing, but anyway, it's above my pay grade. Yeah, so well, good. Glad to hear you're doing well. It is new. Yeah, we are in February already. We're already almost halfway through February, with it being a short month. Valentine's Day for all those lovebirds out there, just around the corner this Friday. Which is actually the halfway point, being it's a 28-day month. So that's insane that we're already that far along. But this is as fun as the season. Obviously, as a fan, you love the season, watching the games. But as kind of like a content creator, media person, or whatever we are, the offseason is actually really fun. Like talking free agency, draft. There's a lot of storylines because during the season, a lot of it is just recapping and previewing games, which is great. But now is okay, how are we talking about the roster construction build, free agents out there? Obviously, the draft's coming up. Hopefully, we'll be at the Combine here in just a couple of weeks out at the Slippery Noodle in the great city of Indianapolis. So, yeah, there's just so much fun stuff to talk about. So excited that you are all on this journey with us, as always. And always on this journey with us is our good friends over at BetOnline. BetOnline.ag, where the game starts. All the best lines. Skinny, did you win any money this Super Bowl? Because I did not. I did not win any money. I lost quite a bit, actually.
Yeah, I won a ton of money because I was the only person to pick, probably in the whole world, the final score. I picked it perfectly.
No, did you really?
No. Oh. I did not think it was going to be a blowout. That's for sure.
Wow. Well, shout out the Madman on this network. He does our UCLA show and then does the USC show with me last week. When we were doing the BetOnline ad, ironically, he was like, real quick, we haven't talked Super Bowl, and his prediction was a Philadelphia Eagles blowout. So he didn't give me a score, I don't think, but he predicted a Eagles blowout. So he was right on that.
Well, stop clock is also right twice a day. Just kidding, Madman. Just kidding. he is the smartest person we know.
Yes, by far and away the smartest guy I know, smartest person I know. But BetOnline.ag, just because the football season is over, they have free agency props on there. They have draft props on there. Obviously, all the other sports, Lakers, Luka, big debut last night. Not huge in the score column, but the Lakers won by 30, dominated. And that we're just seeing what that offense could potentially be. Got the Kings season ramping up. Well, right now it's the Four Nations tournament. You can bet on that. But the Kings season, Clippers, Ducks, Angels, Dodgers coming up in spring training. All that stuff can be done at BetOnline.ag. Tell them the guys over at the LAFB Network sent you. So we're obviously not talking the Super Bowl, but in relation to the Rams, a lot of people have talked about this, and rightfully so. I mean, Skinny, were you kind of surprised at now seeing how these playoffs played out? And it's hard to do this, especially after the fact, because every game is its own game within the game, right? It's not like they're not apples to apples. You can't say the Rams played the Eagles the closest, so therefore they're the second best team in football, and they would have dominated the Chiefs as well, because every game is different. The preparation is different. There's a lot of factors that go into it. All that being said, though, the Rams did play the Eagles the best in Philly, in the snow, were essentially 13 yards or one play away from winning and going on to the NFC Championship game, where they would have hosted the Washington Commanders. So I guess my only question is, like, are you, of course, as we're doing this, Lakers breaking, sign Alex Lynn, big man. So you did a bunch of coverage on that on LFB Network. For those who want to read about it, we already have some pre-coverage, but official, they just did sign it. So this is LA. This is LA fan base network. So we do it all here. But my question for you is, were you impressed that with how this Rams season went, with all the kind of, I don't want to necessarily say turmoil, but with the injuries and the up and down roller coaster ride that it was, that you could argue they were the second best team in football at the end of the day?
Yeah, you could certainly argue that. Looking at, what it makes me think of is how good the Chiefs are and the Rams are in one game scenarios. The Chiefs made it to the Super Bowl, probably shouldn't have with the talent that they had on that roster.
Yep.
But a coach like Andy Reid, a coach like Sean McVay, a quarterback like Patrick Mahomes, a quarterback like Matthew Stafford can keep you in games against the best opponents. So it comes down to a lot of the things are, the coaching. How do you make adjustments for particular opponents? That's huge. Steve Spagnuolo gets a lot of praise for his ability to adjust his defense to match whichever offense he's going up against. And we get to say the same thing about Chris Shula as well, because they played that Eagles offense really well and held them obviously to fewer points this time around than the Chiefs were able to. And this is with, the incredibly young defense. So, it's the team's going to look a lot different heading into this year. So being the second best team in last season, I don't know what that means at this point. And we'll talk about Stafford a bit, but talking about the offseason, this is when you have to improve to put yourself back in that position, with all the free agents and open positions now. It's a whole other season now. I don't want to bring it back down to a negative place, but that's ultimately what I'm trying to say is the two things you have to have in this sport are a great coach and a great quarterback.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And well, it's a good segue because it brings us to kind of the offseason, kind of where the conversation's been. And a lot of people have kind of said this, we've seen on social, but like, it's interesting. And I don't think we disagree with the Cooper Kupp as much as it sucks and it pains us as fans, but it is interesting to see, okay, this team was one play away from getting to the NFC Championship game where, anything can happen. Washington was a hot team also. So I think a lot of people are automatically saying they would have beat them. Like, we don't know that, but one play away from the second to from the semifinals. And yet here we are saying this team could look completely different. And like, why not just kind of try everything you can to run it back exactly like it was? Why do you think that is? Do you think it's because as bad as the season started, everything kind of fell their way down the line and you can't rely on that? Or do you think it's just that they felt that perhaps as much as we all, and we're talking now specifically Cooper Kupp, and then we'll get to Matthew Stafford, as much as we love Kupp, I mean, outside of his presence in the locker room and practice and his just smarts and cerebral in kind of the on-field coach, he wasn't really a factor. Oh, that sounds so mean to say, but wasn't really a factor in that run down the stretch. They're saying like, well, we can save $30 million and get someone that maybe can have a bigger impact. We're going to do that. Like, I don't know. It's weird to think about that. This team was one play away and yet it could look totally different. They're going to kind of not tear it down, but rebuild it in different facets.
Yeah. It's the right move to make for the team. We've talked about it a whole bunch. In terms of just team, a player has to serve a big role. We've also talked about how expensive this offense was. Most expensive offense in the entire league. It did not look like that.
Yeah.
And to the phrase run it back, how many teams have been able to run it back and have a successful season the following season? Well, you look back at the Rams when they attempted to run it back from 2021 to 2022, didn't work out very well. So you shouldn't be looking to run it back. You should be looking to improve. Does improvement look like getting rid of Cooper Kupp in this case, in this year? Yeah. unfortunately, that's the case. I mean, the entire Rams offense had fewer explosive 50-yard plays than Saquon Barkley did in the season.
Yeah.
Saquon Barkley alone did that. So they need, and they know it, and that's what they're going to be seeking out, is ways to make this offense more explosive. Kyren Williams, the hot explosive back. He's great at picking up 4 or 5 yard chunks, turning, 5-yard gains into 8-yard gains, but not that world beater. Also, Puka Nacua, in a similar way, he isn't necessarily that field stretching kind of wide receiver like Jamar Chase or Justin Jefferson. You throw those guys out. Nico Collins, even, that he's not that kind of receiver. Those are kind of more explosive type players, and that's what they're going to be seeking out, and that's what they're making room for, getting rid of Kupp.
Yeah, exactly. And that's why we don't need to belabor this point because we've said it a lot, but that's the reasoning, I think, behind the move and why it does, as much as painful as it is, why it does make sense. And when you look at, the run it back, like, why not just, you were this close, why not keep the same guys? And think about the teams that have run it back. Like, it's usually with, and this is what we'll get to Matthew Stafford, but it's usually with the coach and the quarterback, and, one or two key defensive players. You obviously got to have a key offensive lineman, but then you make changes elsewhere. I mean, look at the Chiefs, right? They traded Tyreek Hill in his prime. Like, they were coming off a Super Bowl win, traded Tyreek Hill, and guess what? They ended up winning 2 more after getting rid of him. And 2 in a row in that sense. You look at teams like the Patriots back in the day in their run, like Wes Welker was in his prime. They let Wes Welker go. We can think all down the line of that happening at certain positions. And as long as you have the coach and the quarterback and a few key at different spots, it can't just be those two. But you look at kind of your weaknesses and where you improve. And I think for the Rams, it was kind of the passing game and the offensive line. Those were kind of the weaknesses that need to be addressed. And it's unfortunate the offensive line is what they spent the most money in. But if they can get it right this offseason, then they have a team built similarly to what, obviously it's a younger, maybe less in terms of premier namesake, but built similarly in what the Eagles had, right? They a dominant pass rush. We know how the Rams good. They're not on the Eagles level yet, but these are first and second year players that keep getting better. And then if they can improve the offensive line, then you have that with a very good quarterback in Stafford. Even at his age, he can still be very good, and certainly on, different in Jalen Hurts in terms of athletic ability and ability to, rush for 70 yards or whatever, like Jalen Hurts did in the Super Bowl. But they would have that kind of trench play with solid quarterback play, and obviously the great coach that is Sean McVay. So that seems to be what they need to go after. And whether that's keeping Alaric Jackson or what, we'll have another conversation about the offensive line and free agency. So speaking of Stafford, we can kind of pivot to that, because that's been ever since it came out he was coming back. And then like the chatter got a little louder of like, well, wait a minute. Will they actually trade him? Like Kelly Stafford on her podcast basically comes out reading between the tea leaves and says like, we want to win. We're not going to be part of a rebuild, but we're also not going to do anything to hurt the team. I'm ready for an adventure. She said in that. And then just recently in a social media post, posted like a blurry photo and basically said, the future may be blurry, but we know, I don't even know what it said. Do you know what it said? We know the here and now or something like that.
I think it was something about how they're going to be together through it all, or I don't know.
Yeah. I mean, it could have nothing to do with football. I think I think at this point she knows how much she riles people up and like plays into it. Like, why wouldn't you? I mean, good for her. I mean, we're talking about it. So,
Yeah.
So let me ask you this first and foremost. Will Matthew Stafford be the quarterback of the Rams in 2025?
I think yes. Because I don't think there's a better option out there. Now, I say that, but there is a scenario where Matthew Stafford and the Rams don't see eye to eye on the direction where they're going right now, what the plan is for the next 3 years, let's say. So it's still on the table. It's still very much on the table that Stafford could move. What do you think? Are they moving on or sticking around?
I think he'll be back to. I think ultimately Sean McVay will have enough say of like, look, I mean, if yes, we could not have a substantial drop off by getting some guys we'll talk about here in a minute. But we know Stafford is McVay's guy, and we want to see that through. So I think ultimately get it done. But it was interesting that it kind of came out that, and we talked about this before too. But last year's negotiations were not like an easy bubblegum and rainbows and flowers negotiation. I mean, it was, and obviously McVay and Stafford aren't in those. It's like Stafford's involved obviously to an extent, but it's his agent and the front office. And I remember talking last summer, like, yeah, we think it's going to get done, but clearly there's something wrong because this is taking months. And we were like, I remember saying, like, joking on the show, like, how does this take months? Like, I just don't get it. Like, I've been in negotiations of, whether it's ad revenue or something, and it's like you go back and forth, maybe over a few emails or maybe 2 phone calls, 3-4 months on like your key most important player. Like, something is not right there. There's some friction there. And it comes out that it wasn't like a good negotiation process. They ended up coming to a deal at the very end. And now they're going to have to do that again. And so I don't think it's a slam dunk. Like I said, I think he'll be back because McVay, I think, will make sure that not that he's in there, but it's like, guys, come on, like, what are we doing here? But it's not a foregone conclusion like so many people thought. And I will say this, Skinny, not that we need to like defend ourselves, but every time we brought up the potential of a Stafford trade, we got a lot of slack. Everyone's like, I stopped watching as soon as you mentioned Stafford. Like, that's never going to happen. Like, what are you talking about? You guys are idiots. Clearly, it's a very real thing. And now everyone's talking about it of like, is it going to happen? Is it not? It's not just a clickbaity for fodder. Like, it's a real thing that he's not guaranteed to be back. Now, like I said, I think he will be. So before we do the conversation, move forward, I think we both agree he will be back, but it's not going to be easy.
Yeah, I think the big question is how many years does he want? How, I think it was LeBron James recently came out. He said I could play till I'm 45.
Yeah.
And that's a kind of mindset of the athlete who's thinking of the here and now. And that's like what Matthew Stafford is thinking. It's like, I'm here, I'm now, I feel great now, but aging athletes fall off cliffs, metaphorically speaking, of course.
Yeah.
And we see quarterbacks of his age where the arm just stops working, from Drew Brees to Matt Ryan to Phillip Rivers, Peyton Manning, all of the above, all in this kind of 37-year age range. And so I think that's going to be the big negotiating point, is how many years does he want? Because I don't think the Rams want to commit to anything more than one more. One more has to be the starting point. Like, there's not less than 1 year contract, obviously. But so I think I think that's going to be the big sticking point, is he's going to want more than one. And I don't think the Rams are going to put anything on the table that's more than 1 year. And I think that's the right choice. And I mean, if that's the sticking point, and I think if Stafford thinks that he can elevate a team, if he can, move to another team and compete for playoff spots and championships with that team, I could see him being interested in that. Then you got to, take into account, like, maybe it's the John Elway of it all. Maybe he just wants to go out on top, and he wants to make sure that the Rams are going to provide him the opportunity to do that. And I think that this team could compete, could be a Super Bowl contender, depending on how the offseason goes. Mm-hmm. So maybe a 1 year contract is all he wants from the Rams right now.
Hey, what's going on, family? Got to quickly tell you about our friends over at Underdog Fantasy, new sponsor and friend of the show. One of the most fun games out there, fantasy games you can do in the industry today. Super easy to do. Go to the App Store or go to UnderdogFantasy.com. Download today. Use our promo code LAFB, or you can just click the link in the description wherever you are watching. That promo code is going to give the new user that you have just become a free pick, one free pick, and up to $1,000 in bonus cash. That's free money. Up to $1,000 in bonus cash. Why would you not want to do that for a simple deposit? Just make sure you use that promo code LAFB or click the link below. The game is super easy. It's super fun. Pick 2 to 8 players in a game. go ahead and go with the higher or lower, whether they're going to have more passing yards, touchdowns, receiving yards, rushing yards, any of that. It's a lot of fun, and just choose higher or lower. That's easy with the opportunity to win. So go to Underdog Fantasy today. Promo code LAFB gets you a free entry and up to a $1,000 bonus cash. He got what, $40 million guaranteed this past season?
Yeah.
I mean, if they can even do, because I'm sure he wants some sort of backstop to where next year there's something that if he wants to keep playing, he's not just like a free. I mean, maybe he wants to be a free. I doubt it, but he probably wants some guarantee of another year, something. And so, like, I would not be shocked at all if they were able to come up with like a 2-year, $90 million deal, but it's like 40 guaranteed. So essentially 40 guaranteed for this year. Next year is under contract, but it's not guaranteed. So they can decide to just move on and it doesn't hurt either side. But it gives him that some wherewithal of having something under contract. Cause I agree. I think it does come down to, if he comes to them and says, hey, 1 year, $45 million, I think they wouldn't even blink twice. I would think they're probably like, okay, yeah, let's make that happen. Anything over 45, I think then you're pushing that seems to me, that seems to be the top the Rams would be willing to go, considering they only paid him 40 this year and he's gotten older now. So maybe 40 is even the top line of where. So it's going to be a really interesting, and I think it does come down to exactly what you said, how long he wants to play, how long that contract he needs for some security, whether he thinks there's a level of pay, which obviously every player does, but if he's willing to go below that at all, or if he wants to just say, okay, if you won't give me that, some other team will. I think where he maybe has less of a bargaining chip is what contender out there is better than the situation he's in. Like the only one I can think of off the top of my head is maybe the Vikings, and even the Vikings, they would only give him a 1-year deal because they're love JJ McCarthy. All indications are they cannot wait for it to be his team. The only reason they would even think about Stafford is if McCarthy's not ready to start the season. So they'll give Stafford a 1-year deal. But like, why would you go to the Vikings on a 1-year deal and not stay with the Rams on a 1-year deal? But I can't think of any other contender that is like a Stafford away from being better than the Rams. They could be maybe a playoff team by adding a Stafford, but who would be better than the Rams? So to me, it comes down to like, unless the Rams just like do not want him, or they're only willing to give him like $27 million, and he's like, whoa, that is like egregiously low, then there's no way this doesn't get done, because him at his age in his career, there's not a Tampa Bay out there, right? There's not a Tampa that's a Tom Brady and a Gronk away from being the best in the NFC. I mean, you remember the year before Brady went there, I can't remember if they made the playoffs or missed it by 1 game. But they had, like, think of that team they had all that talent, all those weapons. Even that year, Jameis Winston threw for like 5,300 yards. He just happened to throw 30 interceptions. So all they needed was a quarterback that wasn't going to turn it over, and they were automatically a contender. Like, I just don't see at the top of my head a team that's that, where Stafford would be like, okay, well, I'll just go there. Like, he'd be downgrading. Certainly. It's not the Jets, right?
Yeah, I mean, the only team that comes to mind, and this is like fringe even, is the Steelers. I think that with that defense, with a couple pieces on offense, they could definitely be in the talk for a contender, especially if they had a actual quarterback at the helm of it all. But yeah, I think you're absolutely right. I think that the partnership between these two is perfectly set up for 1 more year to see what they can squeeze out of it all. And I'm not entirely confident that he's going to last all the way through another season, especially if they don't vastly improve their offensive line. He got hit a lot, cracked a couple of ribs late in the season. He's been kind of banged up over the last 3 seasons, I would say. So, other than that, though, I mean, you got to believe in this team just with McVay kind of in his corner, that they can make a run at this. And if they choose anything else, any other option, they're going into bridge quarterback territory. They're going into rebuild the offense territory, which they might try to do this on the fly rebuild, I think, we're looking at Higbee. We're looking at Jonah Jackson. We're looking at Rob Havenstein. Obviously, we know what's going on with Kupp. Demarcus Robinson's a free agent. Tutu Atwell's a free agent. There's a lot of moving pieces on the offense.
Yeah, a ton. And that's what makes this free agency really, really fascinating because, last year they really doubled down on the offense in free agency with some of those guys you mentioned. And now it feels like they might have to do it again because I think the defense, you need to add some more pieces, but the defense is kind of set. Like we talked about linebacker, obviously a few episodes ago, that's the big key on defense. Obviously you can add like a cornerback, if you want to get a premier cornerback or even just some more depth there. D-line is set. Safety's got some good youth pieces there. So it's really just linebacker on defense. So your focus is going to be offense again. And unfortunately, it's probably going to be the offensive line again, plus a receiver, which is so funny considering they're trading Kupp. But again, we're talking like cap hits and age and all this. So I'm also curious if Stafford in those conversations will be like, well, it's always awkward that like how much power a player has, but I'm curious if he'll be in those rooms. Like, well, what's kind of the plan for the offense? Like, does he feel comfortable with the direction? And you got to think with McVay as your coach, like, yeah, he should feel comfortable with whatever the direction is, but there's probably going to be some potentially conversations, not where he necessarily has the say on who they get or re-sign, but at least is given kind of that blueprint of like, okay, if I do take a pay cut, like show me what's around me to make it worth it. Where is my money going? Like if I'm taking a pay cut, where is that allocated to? And I'm just curious if they'll have a conversation. I don't know. I think some teams do that. I don't know if the Rams have ever done that. They're very just like, they love all the players you can will, but they seem to just be like, do what they're going to do. Just it's business and we're just doing it. But with your future potential Hall of Fame quarterback that, is a year or two away from retiring anyway, that might be a conversation worth having.
Yeah. And Les Snead is always thinking, he thinks in bets. And when you kind of play that out, what are they betting on Stafford this year? They're betting that he's going to kind of maintain his level of play that he put forth in 2024. They're going to bet that they're going to find some pieces to put around him. But the bet goes the other direction too. That's the reason there's this uncertainty right now. This is the reason that, it's like, it's a job. It's a job for him. And imagine if your boss came to you and said, we're not sure if we're going to keep you on. We're going to see what's going to happen over these few weeks. But we like you. We're, if everything works out, we're going to keep you around. Your wife might have some opinions about your boss as well. So, it's a funny business, and fans view it much differently than executives and coaches view it. And the other side of the coin of the bet is, what could we get from like a trade compensation if we wanted to move on, and that's a fluid situation. And like I've mentioned it before, quarterbacks create desperation in this league. There's coaches out there that are about to get fired. They're on the hot seat. Brian Daboll comes to mind. I brought up Kevin Stefanski and the Browns as well. I don't know if he's on the hot seat, but it feels like it's warming up pretty well. GM's similar situations. So, desperation does funny things to people, and they, the Browns made a really desperate move to go get Deshaun Watson. Did not work out. That bet was wrong. But I mean, that was a desperation move. And, the Rams keeping the door open for a desperation move from one of these teams, I think is smart. The Giants have kind of bubbled up into that conversation because they just hired Kelly Stafford's brother, who's obviously Matthew Stafford's brother-in-law, which I think is it's not a great,
yeah.
I mean, maybe they have a fantastic relationship, but
yeah. And it's so funny, but he's been in the league for a long time. So it's not like he just like all of a sudden, like he was on his couch as like a PFF insider or something. And then like, hey, let's go hire this, like kind of like when the Broncos attempted to, or when they hired their coach for an attempt to like get Aaron Rodgers, like that was pretty well documented. I don't think this is one of those moves, but you never know.
Yeah. You never know. And that's a team that's pretty desperate. So, I think they have to see what they can get for him out there on the trade market. I think it has to be a conversation that they have in the building. They would be dumb not to, because there's potential out there that they could land a big haul.
I mean, what do you think the most they could get? Like I think we're pretty confident. Like, unfortunately, Cooper Kupp is probably going to net like a 7th or a 6th round pick. Like,
I've seen as high as a 4th.
High as a 4th. Okay, that's pretty good. What do you think Stafford could net? Sorry.
I mean, the player for player trades are always a lot more fun in this way because the value of that is subjective. So like Stafford for George Pickens. I mean, Stafford and Kupp for Pickens and a pick, like a late round pick.
Okay.
I don't know. I think the highest you could probably get for in terms of a pick is maybe a 3rd. Am I wrong on that?
It's so hard because when he was traded, obviously it was Goff, and I think it was Goff, and like, didn't they throw in also? It was Goff and 2 firsts.
Yeah.
Was it just for Stafford, or they also get like a 6th back? I can't remember. I don't know, but the late round pick doesn't matter if there was one. It was Goff and 2 firsts. So a franchise quarterback who was at a big contract at the time, and 2 first round picks for Stafford. Now being at 4 years later, I mean, yeah, I think you get. I mean, if you could get a 2nd and a 3rd, that's like probably pretty good.
That's great.
Yeah, I think that's pretty dang good. But it's probably, you're right, like a 3rd and some backup player, like a Hunter Long situation when they traded Ramsey. Now, the only difference is obviously quarterback is the most, as you mentioned, desperate position for desperate teams. Whereas, a Jalen Ramsey, as great as he is, or some of these other guys like Von Miller, as great as he is, like, it's just different. It just is. The market is, as soon as they have a contract and they're older, it's just, you're not going to get much value. A quarterback is the one can you think of a veteran quarterback that has been traded? Like, I can't, all of them usually hit free agency. Like Brady hit free agency, Kirk Cousins. I'm trying to think of if any of them have actually been traded late stage in their career. I mean, you can go all the way back to Joe Montana, but even he, I think, was a free agent when he signed with the Chiefs, right?
Yeah. Yeah. It doesn't happen very often just because why would a team move on from a good quarterback
especially when you're in the divisional round of the playoffs, 1 play away.
Right. But it's the weirdness that happens that makes these, look at the Luka Doncic trade. The Mavs were so desperate to move on from this guy that they got Anthony Davis. Never in a million years did anybody think, sitting 12 months away from that trade going, I think there's a possibility. Let me throw this one out here for you guys. Anthony Davis for Luka Doncic. Like, if anybody said that, everybody sitting in our kind of a situation said that, they'd get laughed at any room that they were in. But the trade happened. And these trade happens. You think before the Stafford trade, before it ever came out that he was looking to be traded, nobody would have predicted that. Nobody would think that the Detroit Lions would move on from it. New regime in there, like lots of optimism in that building at that time. Von Miller, nobody would have thought that one was going to happen. Like, these things just come out of the woodwork sometimes, and it only in retrospect doesn't make any sense whatsoever. And even sometimes in the Luka specific one, it doesn't make any sense.
Let me ask you this scenario. So this, to me, and we both want to be clear, like, Stafford, there isn't a better option than Stafford. I think he's your best option going into 25, and we both do think he will be back. So before everyone starts going on the comments, if you joined late or whatever, but just for the sake of argument, I don't think this move would happen on trade, because you're trading for another big contract and you're downgrading for either, in my opinion, for either of these players. But if you can trade Stafford, let's just say to the Steelers, whether you get Pickens and a pick, or whether you get a 2nd and a 3rd, or a 3rd and a 6th, or whatever, you get some trade compensation and you offload that contract. And then either, which it sounds like they will be if they don't find a trade candidate, either Aaron Rodgers or Kirk Cousins are cut and then just free agents. And Kirk Cousins is going to be extremely cheap because the Falcons owe him his entire contract pretty much. So he would sign like a Russell Wilson type deal of like a veteran minimum. Now, I'm not saying Kirk Cousins is an upgrade to Matthew Stafford, but if you're able to get 2 or 3 draft picks or 2 picks and a player, and then you get Kirk Cousins for a $5 million cap hit, like that's the way I think Les Snead might be thinking in this.
Yeah, and there's all sorts of options out there that are not exactly like that, the Kirk Cousins option, but the organization has to start thinking about the next quarterback. I mean, obviously they already are. We don't know what the plan is. We don't know what their options are on for the table for that. But the bridge situation is your next best option, where they draft a guy. Maybe there's a Jared Goff situation in here where they trade up. Maybe they really like Cam Ward. Maybe they really like Shedeur. I don't know.
Yeah, Jackson Dart, baby. Jackson Dart at 26.
Dart. There we go.
I think he's there at 26. Take him at 26. How terrible would that be for if they trade Stafford for everything I said, they sign Kirk Cousins, and they draft a first-round quarterback again? Kirk Cousins would be like, what? Back-to-back years? But he has to know at this point in his career that's coming. Like he's just taking a paycheck at this point and going for a championship. He's
got to know. He's like, I feel like we should be over the era where quarterbacks get butthurt when somebody's drafted. I think we should be over that, but yeah. I don't know.
It's the only position where they get butthurt, right? Like the other positions are always you're drafting a premier player if you're a receiver and you take a receiver in the first round, like, yeah, that's your competition, but you can't get butthurt over it.
Yeah. Especially anyway. Yeah.
I mean, I get it because the quarterback's only one position, whereas the other ones have multiple, but still. So yeah, I mean, that'll be really interesting if it ends up going down that road, down that path. I lost my train. I was going to ask you something else about that. Okay. What did you think of this? And we'll end with this. The report from Schrager of him basically saying like, if things were to happen, I'm paraphrasing or kind of like ad-libbing. If things were to transpire quickly, because he was saying this is during on Radio Row, basically saying that they're not like shopping him quickly right now. But if things like divulge or things go poorly in negotiation, they end up moving him. He basically said they would look internally first and are really bullish on Jimmy Garoppolo as like your bridge guy. I know that pains you, but do you believe that? I mean, do you think they would really go into 2025 with Jimmy G as a starting Q?
I mean, he had a good game in week 18.
Yeah.
I mean, there are so many intriguing options in the free agent market. None better than Stafford. Got to caveat that. There's a lot of fun options, and I don't put Jimmy G up there at the top, but the Rams don't care what I think on this subject, and they brought him in for a reason. This was on the back of a time where they switched horses in midstream, going from Brett Rippon to Carson Wentz. Carson Wentz is available, but they hand selected Jimmy Garoppolo as the backup, and they wanted to get a good look at him. And there hasn't been a lot of talk about it. I haven't seen anything, so that could be he could be the bridge. He could be the one.
Yeah,
I'm not happy about it. I don't think it'll go well. I don't know what you're asking me if it's going to go well. I don't think so, but I mean, he's obviously attracted their attention enough to bring him on once. And McVay kind of gets those star eyes for quarterbacks where he loved John Wolford, man. John Wolford would just made him so happy.
Yeah. For whatever reason.
Yeah.
I still think they should take a flyer. You've written about this before, but I still think they should take a flyer, not as their starter next year, a guy you bring in and potentially hand the keys. I still think Zach Wilson is such an intriguing prospect just because he's only 25. I mean, he's so young still. It'd be similar to like a Sam Darnold who the Vikings got that everyone just cast away, and then he puts up this year and he's still young, and we'll see what happens with him. He's another option we've talked about extensively. I mean, Zach Wilson is 25, and I think he's a free agent. So they don't have to like trade for him. It would just be, basically, I know the Broncos like him as a backup, but obviously if he has a shot to groom in, because the Broncos are set. I mean, Bo Nix is now your quarterback for 15 years or whatever. So he'll never be a starter in Denver. So if he doesn't want to just be a backup, like he wants to go somewhere where he has a viable path to starting, if you're able to get Stafford back on a good contract for another year or two and go get Zach Wilson, I just think that's intriguing just because of his age. I mean, I didn't agree with it. He was the second best quarterback in that draft class when they took him second overall. I didn't think he was that good of a prospect personally, but he was clearly seen by the entire league as a first round prospect, whether it was second overall or later. And that shows he has some skill, has some talent, just obviously needed a better situation, the right development. And there's not much of a better developer than coming to Sean McVay. So that just intrigues me. Just a random thought.
He's had a few good games, maybe as many as Jimmy Garoppolo has had. No, I'm just kidding. Jimmy Garoppolo was a viable starter. He won some games with the 49ers. That's all I'll say about that. Other names on this free agent list. I mean, I'm kind of excited about Daniel Jones, who's not quite 28 yet. He put together a couple of good games. Carson Wentz, I already mentioned, is going to be a free agent as well. Mac Jones. Can I interest you in a Mac Jones? He had a good season. He had one good season. Okay.
Yeah, you can interest me, but
yeah, that's probably the extent of it. But there's Trey Lance out there just waiting for the experiment to work out somehow. But
God, he's still only like, what is he, 23, 24?
24. He's 24 right now.
Crazy.
Yeah. Almost 25. But yeah, I think, Daniel Jones, there's a Sam Darnold option, obviously there. Robert Mays on the Athletic Football Show, he talked about the Vikings franchise tag Darnold and then trade Stafford for Darnold.
What's the franchise tag rate? Isn't it like 48 or no? Maybe it's not that high. Let's see. First year QB franchise tag. If I can spell here. It is 38,301,000.
Well, then, I mean, if once you get him in the building, you can restructure that deal into a longer contract. Yeah. So,
yeah, exactly. The Vikings would do it just so they get something for him, which is, if there's a market, they'll get something, even if it's like a 7th round pick. I guess that's something than just letting him walk away. So that's why they're thinking that.
Yeah.
I mean, would you be? It's just such a weird. I don't know.
I'm not a big Darnold believer. I think he had a good season. I think he's a good quarterback. I don't think he's Stafford level.
I agree. I totally agree. Which is why I probably wouldn't do, like, my thing was always the idea of Stafford, or the idea of Darnold coming to LA it was going to be a much cheaper, younger option. We know, as great as Stafford is, as much as we love him, I mean, this is probably the last year no matter what. I find it very hard to believe even 2 years. And so if you can get a younger, cheaper option that's not a huge drop off, even if he's not your future, but he gives you a 2-3 year window while you actually find your future. Because like we've said many times, the one thing this front office probably messed up was having a succession plan at quarterback, because they have none. And that's why we're having this conversation now going into this year with so much uncertainty. So my thing was always like, if you can get Darnold, either a midseason trade where you're getting him for essentially whatever your asset you give away, but you're getting him for free because the Vikings have probably paid most of his salary already. Or if he's a free agent, and then you can decide what that market dictates, which I believe it's going to be in that 27-year mark. Now, if they tag him and then they have to give up an asset, and again, you said it great, like they will have the ability to negotiate, but who's to say he'll take that? He might be like, no, I'm 38 million. Like, I want at least 38 million. And then it's like,
the franchise is just a 1-year deal. I think he would bite for a bigger, longer deal.
I think he would. I guess I'm playing devil's advocate. I think he would. Yeah. But the thought is, like, if he wouldn't, like, why would you give Darnold 38 million and not give Stafford 42 million?
Yeah.
Like the idea was, if you're giving Stafford 42, 43, 44, you can get Darnold for 25 That's a huge savings and not a huge drop off based on what we saw this year, because everyone now is talking Darnold his last few games. Well, look what we just saw in the Super Bowl with Pat Mahomes. Like, when your offensive line stinks, no quarterback is good. The greatest quarterback since Brady looked like horrible at the Super Bowl. I'm not saying Darnold is that level, but obviously down the stretch when he lost Derisaw, when they played some good pass rushing defenses, he's a different quarterback.
Well,
So
that would be the big bet. I mean, the Darnold play would be, get him into the building, offer him a 4-year contract, and then you have at least have a plan in place for a few years. Versus with Stafford, you're going in all in for 1 year to see if we can get it done, and there's no guarantees. There's injury. There's all it's going all in or going for a little bit of a longer term. But what do I know?
yeah. Like I said, I still think they get it done. I think Stafford's back, but it's very real. I mean, this is not like a conversation just to have a conversation. I think this is a real conversation happening in the front office of is it all in this year, or do we not feel confident enough in this year, or do we feel confident enough in another guy to get us to where we want to go to? It's not just Stafford, but I mean, that's,
if they go in all in another year, which I think they went in all in this last year. They didn't bring in another quarterback for longer than 1 year. Anyway, what I'm trying to say is, they're still in the same position. If they go all in with Stafford this year, they're no closer to figuring out who the quarterback of the future is.
Yeah. And I think what we can say about the Rams, I'm not sure Les Snead would say this, but just based on how we see it work, I mean, they kind of just plan for the year of. Like, they can say they're looking years down the line, and, because a lot of GMs do think that, like, okay, well, this move, what does that set us up for 26, 27? I'm not saying Les Snead doesn't think about that. Obviously, I'm not in the room with him. He's a much smarter guy than I am. But just based on how transactions and off seasons happen, they're basically planning for the current season. And then when the trade deadline hits or the end of the year comes, then they just go into the next season, because we see how these contracts, they end up just cutting the dead money and just eating their losses, or none of their draft picks get re-signed because then they just move on to their next draft picks or whatnot. So they may be just having that, like, well, we don't really care about 26. Like, what's going to be best for us this season? And if it's Stafford, we don't care about 26 or the succession plan. We care about 25 and how we win in 25, which probably some fans really appreciate. But it's because, fortunately, the Rams haven't had a QB purgatory for almost a decade now, since drafting Goff in 2016. And it's a different organization, obviously. But you remember those decade before 2016, it's a lot of dire quarterback play. And think of how the good players still on those teams. And think about the running backs, the Steven Jacksons of the world, these good players. And the Rams were just not good because they had horrible quarterback play. Like, you do not want to be in QB purgatory. I get the goal every year is to win the Super Bowl, and you do whatever you can that year to win the Super Bowl. But there has to be some thought process in the back of your mind of, how do we not end up in quarterback purgatory? The Broncos, since Peyton Manning, the second longest team, except for the Jets, to not make the playoffs. They almost went a decade not making the playoffs since winning the Super Bowl, because they ended up in quarterback purgatory. Like, you just cannot let that happen.
Yeah, 100%. And I think the conversation inside of the building also has to do with McVay's longevity, which we don't have time to talk about today.
Yeah,
but that's also, has Les Snead gotten a commitment, a longer term commitment from McVay? Does he have that in the back of his mind, or is Sean still kind of keeping it fluid and loose?
Yeah, I mean, he was in New Orleans, repping the ring on the set of Fox.
He loves being on TV. He was hanging out with Rob McElhenney.
Yeah, it's great. Like, just on his private jet out there. I'm like, what a guy. Only McVay. Well, not only McVay, a lot of NFL coaches, like Sean Payton's out. I mean, I know he lived in New Orleans forever, but it's so funny seeing these coaches not on the sidelines when they're just enjoying their lives. Like Bill Belichick for his year off. It's like, actually looks like kind of like a fun guy. He's out there just living loose.
Meeting 20-year-old women. It's,
Yeah, crazy. So, well, anyway, we'll end with that. A lot of free agency talk. And we'll be back in just a couple days with even more. Maybe we'll get back to one of our positional talks, which was the plan. But then when all this stuff happens and want to get to it. So let us know your guys' thoughts. Comment below if you're on YouTube. Rams LAFB is a YouTube channel. If you have not checked us out yet, please hit that like and subscribe button. It helps us out a ton. If you're on audio platform, Apple, Spotify, you can just search Rams Skinny. You can subscribe there, or everything can be found on our website, lafbnetwork.com. For Skinny T, I am Ryan Dyrud. Big thanks to BetOnline. Big thanks to Underdog Fantasy. We'll talk to you all in a couple days.